Call this work session to order at 6:01 on the 4th. And we'll start right away with Steve.
All right, so we've got a few things for you. One's a handout for you, but other pieces are on board docs. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I just want to share a couple of things with you. And so especially as you go back and refer to this later, I think it helps to have this data. This is our enrollment history. And you've got two categories in here, those kids that were paid for by the state through certified enrollment and those kids we educate in dark blue and light blue. You can also see on the next graph then, again, the change from year over year from those who we are reimbursed for by the state and those who we educate. One quick note is on the far right hand side, you can see that we're starting to recover open enrollment kids, so that's a good trajectory for us as we bring them back into the district. These are total students in the district. Again, those dark blue and light blue lines, and the lines you see to the right of that in gold and green, those are the projections from our demographers. Craig will talk about this in a little bit, but we use kind of a confidence interval. Our demographers have had perhaps a little rosier view of enrollment increases. Craig and I are a little bit more realistic about that, and so we've always used a modifier on that. Perhaps this helps you understand why we use the modifier on that. This is the screen I'd actually like to spend just a bit of time on to make sure that we think about this in the context of what comes next for us as a district. One of the reasons we're talking about this is because as a state we're funded on a per pupil basis. And so that per pupil funding is directly relevant to us when we think about growth in the district and how it funds our education program. And you see a consistent trend here. These are the 4 years that DeYoung Richter has done our enrollment projections. And you can see if you look at the last 3 years, regardless of which year you look at, 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, they have been getting lower as they look out. So each year, it's kind of like the weatherman, right? They give you a 10-day forecast, and then they give you a 5-day forecast, and then they give you a 1-day forecast, and that 1-day forecast, it looks a little bit more accurate. Well, each year, they're getting closer to these years that they're predicting, and each year that they get closer to those years, they're scaling back their projection of growth for us. So we're going to have them do another projection for us in the fall. If I was looking at the trend line and guessing what I'm going to see, I'm going to see these numbers lower than what they did the last time they projected for us. I think that's important for us to think about, and Craig's going to talk about this in significantly more detail, is when we look at our funding, the state gives us supplemental state aid, but we also, as a district, from an engine standpoint, are living on the growth of our students that we've had over time. So when other districts are getting 1% supplemental state aid, we are getting more than that in new money because we've had the benefit of growth. But the concern that we have when we look out to 25, 26, 26, 27 is that those numbers are going to be substantially lower. And so if the state continues to underfund public education, that's going to have a significant impact on our budget long term. And while that's not next year, right, we're thinking about next year, but as we think long term, we really want to think about structurally how we're spending money in the district. And how we set ourselves up from a long-term standpoint for stability. We can look just an hour down the road here, heading east. And if you follow the headlines, you see that Des Moines laying off 83 teachers next year because you can either move into that known budget or you can drive up to it and go off the edge. And we don't want to do that because we know the impact that that has on staffing, on students, on programs. So we want to make sure that we are well aware of what our means are and then live within our means as we move in that direction. So I wanted to share that with you because I think that, and I know from talking to our administrators that they frequently look at it in the rear view mirror and think about the 200 to 300 students that we've grown on a regular basis over the last decade and project that forward. And we want to make sure that we're actually looking at what the demographers are telling us and what the actual numbers are saying so that when we get to that point in time that we've got a more realistic projection of what our growth might look like.
One quick question on your first set of graphs here and everything with actual enrollment and total school age students provided in structural programming and the differences there. Is that please explain.
Sure, so that
from actual
and Craig, feel free to chime in. Those two numbers come right off of our certified enrollment report. So you see the 7 and the 11 after it. Those are the lines that those come off of in the report. So on October 1st, we certify the number of students that are in the district. That's what the state pays us for when they do that. But if you are an open enrollment student and you live in the district, you count towards our certified enrollment, but then we have to send the money to another district. If you live in another district but you attend school here, you count on their certified enrollment, they send the money to us. We also have weighted enrollment, we've got special ed kids, we've got ELL kids,
Right.
There's a differential count there.
And homeschool, that's part of our numbers and stays.
Dual enrolled, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, very good.
So, and I think that's important for us to understand because the number of students who's are in our seats may be different from the number of kids that we're paid for. And I think, are we up 45 kids? We're up a large number of kids already from October 1st, who unfortunately we won't get paid for because
Until
we won't get paid for them until next year because they arrived after October 1st.
Right. And I know I've brought this up in years past. With Power School, we have the ability to know total kids in our buildings every day.
Every day.
Do we ever track that? Do we ever have any numbers that, you know, we look and we say, okay, these are how many kids that are in the district receiving services today or this week, and look at that? Because when I was looking at some of the data between the meetings of our first meeting in November and our second meeting in November.
Oh, sure.
And some of the changes in
Yep.
actual numbers there, some of them were 45 or greater in some of our schools.
Yeah.
And that's just in a 2-week period.
Right. So you bring up a good point because one of the things as we moved to the new attendance areas, we didn't have the ability to build that level inside Guide K-12. So we were literally doing daily snapshots there. And so as Adam was building out maps, depending on the day he was building the maps, he was doing a real-time data draw. So you saw the actual number of kids that on that date were enrolled in Power School in that attendance area. We don't track it from that standpoint. I will tell you that we do work regularly with our buildings on that because we will look at what that does to class sizes. We rarely pull a teacher from a building, but we will look at classes over time to determine whether, especially the elementary level, additional assistance may be needed if a class size is getting too big. For the most part, with the exception of our single section buildings, those students are generally spread out over multiple sections, so that doesn't cause that much chaos in the system. You might see a class size that's going up or down, but they're usually within the parameters that we set for class sizes.
Well, but with some of those schools that have high class size to begin with, and then you have a swing of 45 students in a 2-week period, it seems to me it's significant.
It can be, and in particular, and that's one of the reasons why on our as we looked at our attendance areas, we looked at things like where are our largest schools that have a high transition rate, and in particular related to our homeless students, so that we could try to better apportion those kids across those attendance areas so we don't see quite such volatility and so many swings in those, because you're right, that can cause a significant concern when you're looking at class size. Thank you.
Just a fun fact, our mobility rate's over 20% in the school district. Just so you know, 20% of the kids don't start somewhere and end up somewhere else. So it's really quite remarkable.
And when you count that, right, you're not counting like your district in and out of the district. You're counting
That's
in
just
and out of the
inner.
buildings.
We track both, actually.
Yeah, we track stability and mobility.
Yeah.
And
I know that, but that number that
The
you
transition that I just mentioned is
that's
between
in
our
between
buildings.
buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I've been working with boards for 34 years. I just want to tell you, I admire your stamina. You spent a lot of time together over the last 4 months, and we're going to do this as efficiently as we can this evening. Hopefully, we'll keep it to about an hour in that time frame, but we'll certainly address the questions that you have as well. But thank you for your dedication. I know the pay is so good for the jobs that you do. But I just wanted to start with the revenue side of the equation on the budget and talk a little bit about how the state impacts us. This first column over here is what the state has given us for SSA, or the allowable growth, each year. And you can see that on average, we've gotten about 1.7, but if you take out this 4, it drops to more like 1.3%. We're estimating 1.25 growth for 2020 budget. Why are we doing that? It's because that's kind of the buzz I hear from Des Moines right now. And some of the rationale behind that is that they want, there was a pretty lively discussion in the election on how much money should go to education. And Fred Hubble was saying more, and the Republicans were saying that they already gave some. And I think there's some sentiment to deal with a little more education funding this year, just to kind of pad that, and then next year they'll be dealing with the whole tax cut thing. And so what they give it, they'll take it away again from education. But you know, that's just how things roll at the state level. So we're working off of a 1.25% for an estimated allowable growth. I'm estimating 1% next year because I'm simply not optimistic on what we're going to get. Even though our state is running a $300 million surplus right now in the general fund revenues, all of our rainy day funds are filled. We're in really good shape actuarially. If we were to sell bonds at the state level, I don't know that it gets any rosier than what they have right now. But if you look at their expenditures, because we're an aging state, Medicare and Medicaid obligations are catching up with the state budget, and that revenue, the expenditures hit that and go beyond really, really quickly if you look at the extended forecast for the state. And so the Department of Management has educated the governor that they don't have the money to spend. And that's what they'll be talking about in the legislative session coming up here in January. Just some points for you to remember, that every 1/4% SSA at the state level means about $250,000 for us. So 1% is about another $1 million in budget growth. That's kind of a easy way to remember that. Our regular program cost, or the revenue that we get per pupil, right now at the state level is $67.36, and we're anticipating that to be $68.21 for the projected year that we're working with. So let's talk a little bit about enrollment. How did we get where we're at? Starting in 16, we received a demographer's report that estimated out through 2024 or 2025, I don't remember which, but we were using 100% of the demographer's estimate at that point in time. This was our actual number. This was the growth between the years. This is what the demographer had projected, and this was what the demographer projected for growth. Well, it was safe to use 100% in those early years because they're more accurate in the early years. But as we go out farther, we felt, Steve and I took a more conservative approach in our projection model for this year, 19, where we only projected 75% of what the demographer said we would have for growth. And what did it turn out to be? 71.5. So we were pretty close for this fiscal year, okay? But we missed it for 2020. We projected 75% again, and what came in was 27.8% of what the demographer had said we were going to grow. They said we were going to grow 315 students, we grew 87. We had used 236 for our budget projection, which means right away we're down $1.6 million from in our 2020 projections, okay? And that's not a good place to be, especially with all the other expenditure pressures that we placed on the general fund at this point in time. All right, so let's talk a little bit about a couple of other things. IFERS. IPERS represents 7.3% of our total general fund expenditures. Can you believe that? This is what the employer commits for retirement for all the staff that we have. 7.3% of our total general fund expenditures go to the IPERS retirement fund. The rate is now 9.44%. The employee rate is 6.29%. So the total is a little over 15.5% when you add the two together. Medical insurance represents 7.5% of our general fund expenditures. That's really a large expense. Again, when you start looking at our, where we spend our money, medical premiums and medical coverage on the part of the employer that's paid for the employees is a pretty good chunk of money within our budget each and every year. So let's just review real quickly where our money goes, okay? First and foremost, we are a people-driven organization. So of the $166 million we spent last year, nearly 140 of that was spent in wages and benefits. So 84% of our budget is spent for people costs. Now, best practice in the industry in the state of Iowa would suggest that this number should be 80. So we're about 4% above where we should be. And why do I say that? It's because if you look at the entire operation, once you get above 80% personnel costs in all of our overall expenditures, you start stripping away from the other parts of the organization those needed funds to sustain a smooth operation. Let's talk about textbook replacement cycles. That's one of the first things you always sacrifice when you get into a budget situation, because you can always delay it a year, right? Well, that's what happens when this number goes above 80%. You're not going to be able to deal with your utility costs. You're going to pay the gas and the fuel and the water and the sewer and all those kind of things for your infrastructure. You're going to pay the AEA. You're going to pay all of those costs that make up the other 16%. So you really start to pinch the operation down when you get above that 80% mark. So one of the things, and Brady's going to think I'm picking on teachers tonight, but I'm not. I have the greatest respect for teachers, and my daughter's a teacher. Education's been great to my family. I've been in education a long time, but the facts are what they are. And I just need to share with you where we spend our money. And so if you break down this category up here, you'll see that the teachers are the lion's share of what we spend for personnel costs. And it should be. What are we? We're an educational institution. And so unequivocally, I can say when anyone asks me, where do you spend your money? And I say, in the classroom. Because that's where we spend our money. We spend it in the classroom. The unfortunate part about what we're talking about tonight, when you reduce your budget, and you're all going to tell me as board members, cut as far away from the classroom as you can, I'm here to tell you that that's an impossibility. You can nip around the edges, you can fuss with as much as a budget as you want, but this is where all the money sits. Okay? It just is. It's just the facts. You have to strip away the emotion and absorb the numbers. The facts are what they are. That's where we spend our money. All right, so moving on. Here's something that's interesting as well. Last year, we had $10 million in employee costs increase, okay? And 6.4 million of that was in our teachers group, or roughly 63% of that cost increase. What's kind of interesting about this number is that if you really dig down, you start figuring out what's in there. About 2.5 of that was settlement costs. In other words, compensating returning teachers. All the rest of this number are new FTEs introduced to the system. New teachers introduced to the system. Why? What happened in 18? Liberty. A combination of RAM and Liberty resulted in us introducing 104.55 new FTE to this school district in the last 2 years alone. 104.55, roughly 105 FTE of new teachers to this system. That's not replacing the ones that retired, okay, that were already here. That's new FTE. Liberty and RAM. That's what we're looking at. Okay? So look down here. 5D. The certified staffing ratio, all of these numbers come off the basic education data reports that we send into the state. But we're not that much different than the state average. When you roll up all of our certified staff in the district, we're pretty much right where the state average. But our classroom ratios are a lot higher. Why is that? We have a lot of teachers who aren't in classrooms performing other duties for us. Lots and lots of those teachers. Okay. And some of that is brought on by the teacher leadership grant, where we have coaches and all of that kind of stuff that we built that framework around. That's a state designed program, right? That's a categorical fund. We can't spend it on anything else, but it does pull teachers out of the classroom. And so when you send in this data, it makes it look weird in that our teachers are actually teaching a full load in the classroom, and yet if you look at these state averages overall, they don't look so bad. So you really got to dig into that data to try and figure out what's going on and where these expenditures are going. In 2018, Iowa City had the distinction of being the highest regular salary district in the state of Iowa. Out of 333 school districts, we ranked number 1 in the state for the average teacher salary of $68,300. Okay. I threw the administration down there because people always love to pick on the administration in the public, and I just thought it was something that you should be aware of, and I show you this on a quarterly basis. We're pretty efficient in our administration. We really are.
But shouldn't we be striving to be number 1?
We should. We can strive to be number 1 if you want to be, right? Are there always areas that we can look at and tweak and fuss with? Absolutely, and we're going to cover a few of those with you at the end of this presentation. But I just wanted you to be aware of kind of where we sat in this particular area, because the question will come up from the public, and you'll be interacting with the public on this. So when you roll up all the teaching costs, you roll up our salary, you roll up all the benefits, the medical, the FICA, IPERS, all that kind of thing, an average teacher costs us about $91,000 now. A paraeducator, 27, an administrator, 157, custodial, 52, and on and on and on. Those are just kind of the rule of thumb that you can use in the back of your mind as we go through this budget process, okay? All right, moving on. I just wanted to show you this. I've shown you this before, and I want you to keep this number in mind. Right here at 1.25, we would introduce about $1.8 million to our budget. That's the overall growth in our regular program, okay? $1.8 million. This is what Steve was talking about in enrollment. I just want to spend a little bit of a few of your minutes on this. So this is the actual that showed up this year, and the demographer had projected 315. So where in this grade configuration did we lose the kids? And what's really concerning to me is we lost the kids in lower grades. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where we lost the kids. Long term, that doesn't bode well. It means that we're flattening out in our enrollment because those kids aren't going to be around to matriculate up through the secondary, right? That has an impact for our facility master plan discussion that you plan to have next year. Okay? Are the kids really coming? Who do we have to plan for? Where do we need to tweak our facilities? All those kind of things. I know Procter & Gamble let a few people go. I know ACT let a few people go. I think we had some families leave town. I don't think the university expanded its footprint this last year in the medical community. And I think what you saw was the end result. I don't know the answer to this question. You know, you're in touch with the community better than I. But I just wanted to point out that those kids didn't show up this year that we were planning on having. Steve said that we're doing better in open enrollment. This is a positive, yes. We have 154 coming in, and we're only sending 382 out. It's still a net loss to us of $1.5 million, but that's a whole lot better than what it's been in the past. It got up to, in 17, up to $2.3 million of net loss, and that's pretty significant. So you've seen these before. Where does our money go? And this is the more detailed report. You can look that over. Here's what we settled for last year, and I just wanted you to see that down here, when we have about a $3.3 million ad for all of our groups as they come up, you can see that the teachers are the lion's share, as they should be, at around 80% of all of the groups that we service. But the total package increase was 2.4%. 2.4%. Remember that. I asked you to remember the 1.8 million. I'm asking you to remember the 2.4%. So as we go on, this is our teacher bargaining model that we use, and Brady's seen this before as well. But when we move all of our teachers, when we make them all a year older and move them down the salary schedule and all that kind of thing, when we give the longevity at the end for the teachers that are above step 14 and that kind of thing, we throw $25 in for a premium increase in insurance this year, and Lori was in the meeting last night. Lori, we might not have to increase insurance rates. I don't know. We'll see. We're doing really well this year. We're having a good experience. And so, you know, I don't know. This is just a guess at this point in time. But I want you to see this number at the bottom. For the teachers group, when we do this analysis without any money on the base whatsoever, $0 applied to the base at this point in time, over here, you can see, what's the number that we come up with? $1.8 million. How much more money are we getting in our budget under our assumption and revenue? $1.8 million. So just moving the teachers without any application to the base consumes our entire new money. Okay? There's no money left over for any of the other employees. There's no money left over for an actual increase for the teachers here. And it takes our entire new money. So
That's assuming all the same teachers are here?
yes, we took all the teachers that we have on staff right now and aged them up. That's how we do our projection model. Yep. And then finally, another area that's near and dear to our heart is attendance support busing. Just wanted to show you the money that we have invested in attendance support busing, and it's substantial. Some of us who have been around a long time thought we eliminated discretionary busing a few years ago, but we really didn't. We added most of it back through attendance support busing, and we're spending quite a little bit of money, getting those kids to school that have been identified by our student family advocates of struggling to get to school. All right, that is in essence what I wanted to share with you. Now I want to talk a little bit about the projection model itself. This is a really large spreadsheet. Over here, if you were to go to the actual core of the spreadsheet, you can see lots and lots and lots and lots of numbers over here. But we've simplified it, and this is what I want to just spend a little bit of time with right this minute. So, up here in the top line is what we expect and what we project for allowable growth from the state. This is a supplemental state aid. We're talking about 1.25%. Here's our actual enrollment that we're applying that to this year. You can see we were at 215 last year, 310 the year before. This is really down, okay? And it's very impactful to us. Why did I plug in 2%? I plugged in 2% because by the time you age up the teachers, and you do all those other things, you saw the settlement down there at 2.4%. This last year, we ended up with a total increase of 2.8% in our general fund expenditures as a result of that. So you're not going to end up with probably less than 2% unless you have some real significant changes in the way we apply compensation in this district in moving forward in future years. So these are the numbers that we can play with. So what's our structural deficit right now? Well, if you just assume that we can keep all of our expenditures at zero this next year, all right, we have a $5 million deficit from break-even point. $5 million. That's what we need to cut from the budget. All right? Now, anything we add on to that will have to come off somewhere else. So let's say we did age up the teachers in their salary schedule. Let's say we decided to give everybody in the school district a small raise. Then this number grows, and then we're going to have to reduce from somewhere else. Okay? But we have basically a structural deficit of just a little bit more than $5 million. That's what we're having to deal with. Now, what's it take? Well, if I put a negative number in here, we're going to have to reduce our expenditures back down to 2018 levels in order for us to be able to balance our budget. This means we have $54,000 and change spare cash, okay? That feels a lot better going out that direction than what we were looking at before with a 2% in here. You see these negative numbers on the unspent balance? These are illegal. You can't allow this school district to get to that point. The School Budget Review Committee steps in. They impose their plan on you, and they say, you will cut X number of dollars over the next few years. And it's called a workout plan, and that's exactly where Davenport finds themselves right now. Davenport is under a workout plan imposed by the School Budget Review Committee because their board, their management failed to make the appropriate adjustments, and they allowed their school district to go negative in their unspent balance. And they're having to pay the piper at this point in time.
So Greg, what's that look like? Do they come in and tell you what your teachers are going to be paid, or tell you where to take the money from?
Yeah, they do. They come in and they'll bring in a team of experts. And they will tell you they bring in a team of experts, and they'll look at your budget and they'll make decisions. Now, we know where our money goes, which it goes to people, And so they're going to reduce staff as a way to get to that balanced budget the quickest, because that's the biggest return on investment for them in order to get you worked out. So they'll come in and they'll trim a lot of staff. Frequently, that'll mean then an elimination of programs, because you can't support the programs without the staff in there. And so you'll frequently see reduction in course offerings, reduction in extracurricular activities, things like that, in order to get you back on your feet. Their theory behind that will be, when things are soluble in your district again, you can start adding them back.
It's kind of a scary event. I was at the SBRC meeting when Davenport was there, getting their program, talked to them about that. And the school board members are required to attend, so that you can all be spanked along with the administration and the superintendent for not making the appropriate decisions on balancing your budget. And Dave Roeder doesn't mince any words. He's the director of Department of Management, and he can be kind of tough-minded when it comes to those kinds of things. And I felt badly for the folks in Davenport because they did endure quite a tongue lashing at that point in time. But what caused it? It was their inaction to deal with some of their structural deficit problems, okay? And we can't allow that to happen.
Right. And just one quick question. On your unspent balance that we have to maintain,
Yes.
what is that figure? And I know at times the board is adjusted. Is that different from a board goal of our unspent? Or what is the state, is there any, are we different from what the state minimum is, or that's where we are right now?
That's exactly where your superintendent directions, whatever they're called now, your superintendent directions say that you'll maintain 5 or above. That's actually best practice recommendation at the state. 5 to 10% is where they want you to be. And if you look over here in 2018, we're at 5.4%. And that's exactly where we need to be.
Did you print that one out for us, or is that just on the overhead? Because I couldn't find that page.
No, this projection model is too massive to print out. I can print out portions of
Okay,
it.
all
But,
right.
yeah.
All right.
But
So we're at the bare minimum.
right now, we're exactly where we need to be for unspent balance according to board directions, and in the state, that 5 to 10%, we're exactly where we need to be. And it's about $9.5 million for us. But you can see what happens because we're of the overspending that we're projecting this year. That's coming down in a hurry. And so we need to be mindful that you'll have to allow the superintendent to go below his 5% mark, okay, for this next year, because we're going to finish below that. But we need to make these reductions in order for that to not sink any farther or even go negative.
So if, so we're not illegal next year, just
Nope.
out of board policy. And then if we go negative, but we can show a positive trajectory, will they be, no?
No, you can't go negative. There's absolutely no tolerance for having a negative unspent balance. Yeah.
Now, in the Davenport scenario,
Uh-huh.
I know they went too far down. Was that more than just 1 year, and
Mhm.
they clobbered them? Is that
Yeah.
is that how? It's that quick that they'll step in?
Yeah, I think it took Art Tate about 3 years to get to that point.
Yeah, and what they'll do is, and they're very direct with you, they watch this. They watch your unspent balance, and if they are concerned that the trajectory of your unspent balance is heading south, they send you a letter.
They
So-
send the board president
Yep.
and the superintendent a letter.
So if you'll remember back in, and I don't, what, our 0 year, right? The
12.
board made the decision at that point in time to suspend their board goal of 5% and to spend down with the idea that we were then going to build it back up. The office management budget looks at our budget that we submit, our certified budget when it goes in. They see that, And they project then, if you do exactly what you did next year, you do next year what you did this year, you're going to be negative. Then, as Craig said, I get a letter, board president gets a letter, they say, hey, when we run our model, you're going to be negative next year, time to do something about it this year. So under this scenario, we won't get a letter this year.
You'll get a letter next.
We'll get a letter next year. We'll get a letter next year that says, you look like you're heading underwater.
So my message to you is pretty simple this evening. We need to deal with this year in a pretty radical way. $5 million has got to come off of here. Remember, I've been sounding the alarm that this is a 2-year process. 20 and 21 were always going to be our pinch years. So if you look at this, a 1% increase puts us at status quo if we make that reduction next year, and then we start building back up. And if you project this on out, it goes up and it feels a lot better, okay? This is 2 years of pretty substantial pain, but this is the year that we have to make the massive change in our operation, okay? And then that'll right the ship, and we'll be off and running again and be able to. But it's all part of opening up a high school. It's all part of growing and the growth. We have built into this model opening up Grant. I mean, all of those come at a cost, right? And so we've reached that point where now we have to make some adjustments. And Steve's going to talk to you about what our thoughts are on how we make that happen.
And maybe I'll share with you as we're queuing that up. So one of the things that we know is that our enrollment growth had been fairly stable, and now we've seen it go down. So this modeling that we've been working on, had we been maintaining the growth that the demographers were projecting, and even Craig and I being pessimistic, not 100% of the growth that they were projecting, but 75% of the growth that we've been operating on, we'd be in a much different situation.
Totally different.
So the fact that we had 85 new kids this year, I mean, as Craig and I were watching the enrollment numbers, getting closer to that certification date, I mean, you can imagine the apprehension that we were dealing with during the month of September as we moved up to certified enrollment, because that gap of having 85 kids and not 230 kids, that's a financial issue for this year, but that presents then the same financial issue every year there on out, and it compounds.
Yep.
So one bad year in enrollment growth causes a ripple effect in our budget. So we started working on that right away. And before you look at this, just think conceptually about this. This isn't the first time that we've had to go through this, because when the state zeroed us out, we faced this issue before. So we brought the administrative council in, and we spent a lot of time talking to them about where our challenges were and what our options were. And we came up with some recommendations out of that work that we think gets us to a bottom line. You see $5 million down here. Now, this is our first crack at this. So we recognize that as a board, we need your input, because we need to make sure that the direction we're moving in is a direction that meets your expectations as you represent the community. So we're going to share with you the areas that we've identified that we think we can find some efficiencies. I'm going to share with you the entire laundry list of things that we covered. They're on the attachment on the board doc. And from that, we hope to get enough direction to know what we need to do as an administrative team to get that nut at the bottom at that $5 million level. So one of the first things that we did was we looked at staffing in the district, because that's 84% of our spending. And the first 4 lines on here pertain directly to employment categories in the district. We have an early retirement option that's out there right now, and it is on par with what the early retirement offer that we did the last time we were in this kind of crisis situation. When we were at 0% and we offered the enhanced retirement last time, we had 100 total employees choose to take us up on that opportunity. So that causes a significant opportunity for us on the administrative side. From the teaching perspective, if you can bring in younger, less experienced teachers, you save that differential between your older, more experienced teachers. That allows us to maintain staffing and maintain programs. At the administrative level, we get some attrition there. That allows us to look for some efficiencies and evaporate some positions. So while we don't get that same gap top to bottom that we do with our teachers because they're not on the salary matrix like our teachers are, it does give us the opportunity through attrition to evaporate positions behind people as they leave. So coupled in those two areas, we know what we think our maximum savings is. We scaled that back and we hope that we could see $3.3 million worth of savings out of those two. We'll know that by the end of January. So the good news is that that gives us room to work because as we're going through this dialogue with you, we'll be getting that information in and we'll know that before we get to the end of the road. Remember, we certify our new budget April 15th or before, so it'll be that board meeting before that.
So the cutoff on the retirement incentive,
January 25th.
okay,
So by January 25th, we'll know who those folks are, so that gives us February and March as we're getting to that April date to make sure that we are in the range that we are looking for in order to make this mark down here.
and undoubtedly, people that have already taken that option, do we have any idea, or?
We don't have any paperwork in yet. The
Okay.
the first meeting with staff is December 13th, which is
Oh,
next
okay.
Thursday, so forms will be handed out next Thursday. We'll probably start to get some in immediately thereafter. Most will come in right after the holidays.
Okay.
We like to set it up this way so that families have that opportunity over the Thanksgiving break and over the winter break to confer with spouses, with kids, with extended family, make those decisions. So Phil, to your point, we'll get some right after that December date when the forms are handed out, but most of them will come in right after the beginning of the calendar year. When people
So
come
we
in.
don't have a sense yet as far as with these
No,
very
I won't.
lucrative.
Yeah, I won't put Brady on the
enticements.
spot, but I know that there's been a lot of dialogue at the building level and with staff. We've been answering a lot of questions up here at the office since that time, so we're cautiously optimistic that,
It's very well received.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to get there. The next two lines, again, are staffing issues, and they have to deal with our weighted resource allocation model. We took a look at the way we've been staffing, and when we're done with this conversation, I'm going to talk to you about some modifications to our model that'll take us from 3 levels to 5. That'll help us with our staffing, both in certified staff and support staff. Coupled between those two, we're hoping that we'll have about $1 million in efficiency out of that. Right now, our RAM staffing model, as it's currently in existence, it costs us about $3 million a year to run that. So it's a relatively expensive proposition.
Do we have any way to quantitatively gauge the success of that? Because
Yeah.
we've, and that one too is a double-edged sword, because that is driving up class sizes in other areas.
Right.
And believe me, I was one of the people campaigning that said, put the resources where the kids are. And I think we have 3 years of data.
So
that I think we need to have a very serious look at, is more money helping, and what are we getting back for that investment?
So we know there's a couple of things from a return on investment standpoint that we get. One is academic achievement, and then the other one is social emotional learning. And so what you're going to see, I hope, when I show you the revised model, is that we can continue to focus the needs on those buildings that have the greatest challenge, but still look for some efficiency inside the system. Because we do know, and I'll just talk about the socio-emotional piece in particular, we do know from direct interaction with our staff and looking at numbers that we are experiencing a better learning environment for those most challenging buildings where we have reduced the class size. So fewer office referrals, the office referrals that do come in are less severe. When you talk to the teachers, they'll tell you about more time spent on teaching and learning and less time spent on classroom management. So we know that at the apex of the need, we know that there's a return on investment there. From an academic standpoint, I'd prefer to let Amy or Diane speak to that. We know where our scores are at, and perhaps that's something as we go further into this process that we can bring that in and we can look directly at that. I don't know, Amy, if you've got anything real quick to add.
Yeah, just a reminder, we did share some of that out in the June 12th, 11th, 10th, somewhere in their board meeting. It's actually under the item called RAM, so you're not going to look for it under academic achievement or something like that. But that does show over the last couple of years that our buildings that are being staffed with the lowest possible staffing ratio, they are making bigger gains, of course, but I guess the question that you have to ask back to yourself when you have farther to go, does it make sense that you would see those gains with or without that RAM? But we are definitely seeing not only in the overall achievement with those fast reading scores, but also in our subgroups, particularly our Black and African American kiddos. So I'll just encourage you to go back to that first June meeting that's under RAM.
So I'm going to come back to the RAM model, so if you just hang on to that one, we'll come back and look at the proposed changes to that. Right now, we spend about $550,000 a year on overtime and additional straight time. Just conceptually, additional straight time is I got a 30-hour position, but this week I worked 35 hours. So I'm not being paid overtime for that, but that 5 hours isn't in the budget. And so when we aggregate that, it's about $550,000. We spent a lot of time over the last year and a half really digging down into those details and understanding where that's happening in the district, and then working to change our supervisory behavior at all levels of the organization so that we can get a better handle on this, better control. One of the things that's really going to help us is our move to the employee resource platform that's going to give us a better ability to control those things over time and hopefully be able to achieve some efficiencies. We set what we hope is a realistic goal of getting about 25% of that back this year. Obviously something that we then plan to continue to work on as we hit that second year as part of this process. Curriculum adoption. Craig talked about this. Amy and Matt and Diane and I have been working on this. This is not a firm number right now. Diane has been working on looking at what our options would be to stretch out the acquisition. JPO recognizes this. Our language arts adoption is the next part of that process. And so the question is, can we parse that out rather than K-12? Is it K-6? Is it K-2? Are there components of it that are must-haves that we need to do next year? Are there things that we can push out into subsequent years? What does that do to other areas of curriculum adoption in subsequent years? But this is our tentative look at that. Yeah, Phil.
Well, and one other thought on that one. The example was made on textbooks, but with Chromebooks, you don't have the luxury of saying, we're going to go 7 years with that software. We buy 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, the screen goes blank. So what, if any, have we locked ourselves into with our curriculum needs with putting it in that technology format?
Yeah.
Do we have that we're committed anyway?
We do have some flexibility with it. I think that you'll find that most of our curriculum includes both paper and print materials plus curriculum materials. Also, you'll see as you drill down into the other things that were on our brainstorming list, is there was a conversation in there about technology acquisition. I can tell you in the 0% year, that was one of the years that we actually then looked at our rollover cycle on technology and stretched it out. And so we went from a rollover period on hardware and added 2 years to that, so there was a longer cycle in our hardware acquisition. I know that we had that conversation about sources of revenue for that, so right now SAVE covers a lot of our technology acquisition. You'll see in our subsequent dialogue down here, we've had a lot of conversation on the administrative team about what can those streams of revenue pay for and what should they pay for. And there's some flexibility in there. Not always a lot, but definitely some. So that was a topic that's come up as we've looked at that. And I wouldn't say we're locked in. I'd say that there's still some flexibility in it. But part of it is then looking at the cost of it too. You know, one of the solutions or one of the suggestions out there was if you get rid of the paper and the print components of it, sometimes that technology component is substantially less. So where are you better off? Are you better off going all paper, or are you better off going all digital? When you look at the overall total cost of ownership.
But and you alluded to SAVE. I thought we maxed out SAVE. Do we still have SAVE?
There's a component of our SAVE dollars. Our SAVE is maxed out in that we have it allocated, right? So we allocate an annual technology expenditure out of SAVE. So that each year we have planned to spend dollars out of the SAVE account. So when we say that it is obligated, there isn't any additional funding in there that we can obligate for anything else. but there is flexibility in what we are spending it on. So there is some flexibility within that. We also looked at the building supply budget. We recognize that many of our costs are going down as we look at everything from just-in-time delivery on products. Some of our office product expenses are going down, and as those are going down, we think we can absorb a $10 per pupil reduction at the building level, which will save us $150,000 overall. We have a cautious savings on here at third-party contracts. We have been working for about 6 months now to develop a comprehensive database of all of our third-party contracts. That's for anything that is not done by someone in the district. And our goal is to eliminate as many of those as we can. We've looked at them in terms of what it is, what the revenue source for it is, when's the next expiration date, essentially how soon can we get out of that. So we've identified right now easily $50,000. As we get further into this process, we think that number is going to grow, and we anticipate that that number will grow over time because in many cases you might have signed a 2-year or a 3-year deal in order to get the total cost down. As we get closer and closer to some of those expiration dates, we're going to see those contracts go away.
Can you just give an example or two of some of those contracts, for example?
Sure. So we've used Thought Exchange in the past.
Right.
That's expiring.
Okay.
From a survey standpoint, we've used K-12 Insight to do our culture and climate survey. That contract is expiring. So as we reach the end of the life of those contracts, we're not going to renew them. Transportation routes. Craig shared with you that we've got 10 discretionary attendance support routes. We remain cautiously optimistic as we move into our new attendance areas, and we look at supporting student transportation, that we are looking for an efficiency within our discretionary transportation to be able to evaporate about $116,000 in route costs there. Right now at the Kirkwood Regional Center, we spend $110,000 to send that loop route around to all 4 of our high schools. It's not well subscribed right now. So we have that on the docket as something that we would like to look at. There may be some costs associated with assisting those students who are using it to get to school, but certainly less than that $110,000.
Can you provide us with the number of students that survey?
It changes day to day because it's not like your school bus route where the same kids ride it every day, but the number is far less than we thought it would be.
Yeah.
So I can get a range for you, weekly ridership or something.
On that,
Yeah, we're close to somewhere between 20 and 30, usually, between all 4 high schools
Really? 20 or 30 students?
that take advantage of it. So, like Steve said, it may be different 20 to 30, but that's kind of what our ridership is.
And that's a day.
Yeah.
Is there, what trend do you see in terms of what high schools and, are all 3 high schools, or I know, all 4 high schools using transportation to the same degree?
No, not all the same, I would say. I don't know if I know enough to probably give you enough trend data on it, Lori, but
That's
you know,
not
one
a
thing we've
huge
had to
number.
explore this year as well is trying to put 4 high schools on a loop with 1 bus and get them all back on
Sure.
time has
Right.
not been an effective solution for us.
Right.
So that cost number's also increased because we've had to explore some other options to maybe take a high school off the loop and just transport that back and forth independently. And so we've been problem solving that throughout the year, but yeah, I mean, it's a cost implication for us for the amount of students that use it and trying to work through that. So like Steve said, I think we need to dig into it some more, what that means.
So again, our goal with part of this process was to say to you, we realize that there's an obligation on our part to look at budget reductions. We know that that target is $5 million. We've sat down and spent some significant think time with our administrative council considering what our options are. We think that at least given our first shot at it, this is these are some of the best choices that we think we have. One of the things that you'll notice on here is that, and you're going to see this in a minute, and I know Craig said we can't do it, but the goal is to stay as far away from the students in the classroom as you can. And so that was one of the foundational pieces, the underpinnings, if you will, the mental construct that we had as we went into this is how do we go about making the best, the least bad decisions, I think, is the way Jim Peterson always used to describe it, how to make the least bad decisions out there. And so we think this gets to us. I want to share, before you react to this, yeah?
I just have one question on the bus,
Yeah.
transportation bus route. Well, does that also include looking at things like we won't need a bus from Windsor Ridge to take kids to Longfellow anymore? things
We
like that?
won't know that until we get through that first routing process. So we don't know if those will be offset by ads in other areas. And so we actually had our first round of responses to the RFP for transportation last night before? Last night.
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yep.
And so that'll be one of the next steps that we do now that we've got the new attendance areas, is be able to have them run a route simulation for us, and from that be able to determine whether or not our net route is a plus or a minus.
So I'm curious about that route cost, 30,000? Didn't it used to be 40? Is that decreased? Or is this a different cost when it's a discretionary?
Well, the route cost is 50,000 total,
Okay, I
but
was
when
gonna
you
say.
split it up between PEPAL and general fund,
I see.
what we're talking about here is a general fund savings, so I wanted to split that out for you so you knew exactly what that amount was. It's not 50,000 in total, it's more like 30,000, 28 or 29, whatever number I had.
There's recovery to the PEPAL fund on that too,
Yeah.
but we can't apply that to that deficit
Right.
that's in the general fund.
Sure.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next segments. I'll give you the opportunity to do that offline, but I just want to let you know what they are. So there was conversation at the administrative table about categories of staffing and, worst case scenario, what would we have to look at? You can see literally every staff category was brought up when they looked at it. None of these obviously made the line up above, and I think people recognize the issues that come along with that. Staffing modifications, so that's taking a look at keeping current people online, but looking at how we use their time. So we've got release time and stipends for coordinators. There's extended day contracts for people that work into June or start before the school year in August. There's a conversation about substitute staff costs, and that's for all staff costs, both certified teachers and support staff in the district, and when you get support staff for people. For those of you that may remember, Brady, you may remember, I'm not sure who else might, Craig, you might, on the 0% year, we actually went to a delay in filling secretarial and para jobs. You had to be out of the district for 2 or more days before we filled it. There was quite a bit of feedback from building administrators about this particular item when this was brought up around the table. It causes a lot of operational challenges. If your front office secretary is gone and you're at Hills and you only have one and you're not going to fill it for 2 days, who's answering the door and letting people in? But again, they put, to their credit, the administrators put all these ideas out on the table so that we could go through them and talk about kind of where they stacked up in the list. Contract modifications, again, always comes up, looking at how we minimize our wage increases. There was a conversation about whether or not we ought to have a contribution to healthcare premiums, whether we were looking at restructuring non-certified staff contracts and duty coverage. In program modifications, there's a lot of pieces in here. Again, if you're trying to keep your reductions away from kids and away from programs, these are all a challenge, whether it's pre-kindergarten dropout programming, increasing class size. One of the interesting ones that had some conversation at the last couple meetings is the very top one, reduced categorical services to match categorical funding. You may remember that we go to the SBRC every year for ELL support. Because in that case, the state knows that they don't give us enough money to educate our English language learner students. They let us accumulate the differential, what we spend out of our general fund, and then we can apply to get that money back from the state. That's one of the few areas where you can apply to get that differential back. In most areas, if you overspend that categorical funding, that comes out of your general fund. So one of the suggestions was we should only spend the categorical funding on the categorical programming and not spend general fund money out of that. Reducing athletics and activities, eliminating field trips. So those were all part of that conversation. The budget modification, looking at professional development. They're both looking at in and out of district professional development on that. Technology expenditures, Phil, this is where they had that conversation about that adoption process and how that fits into our teaching and learning. PEPAL expenditures, and that would then allow us to move other applicable funds into PEPAL. We have more PEPAL authorized expenditures than we have PEPAL funds. So you can cut down on some things you do in PEPAL and move other general fund costs in there, increasing our rental fees. The last one on there, I actually have a meeting scheduled next week to talk to our friends at Grantwood AEA about whether or not there's an opportunity for us to gain more control over the flow-through that we send to them. If you look at the packet that Craig gave you, that's a fairly substantial amount of money, $6 million plus. And could we possibly use some of those funds to supplant some of the things that are going on in the district now? So I wanted to share that, again, that laundry list of things with you that the admin council did through their brainstorming process. From that, we called what we thought were our best choice opportunities to get to that $5 million. Don't necessarily expect you to come out with a thumbs up or thumbs down on these ideas right now, but we do need you to think about those. Know that we're going to continue to work on this. We've got 4 months essentially to get this figured out. We're going to know a lot more about where we stand on January 25th. We're going to continue to work on this as an administrative team. What we'd like from you right now is any of your initial thoughts or feedback. If you see us going in a radically wrong direction with any of these on here, we need to know about that sooner rather than later. If there's other areas that we haven't listed that you would really like us to take a look at, we need to know that too, so that we can go through and do the digging that we need to do the due diligence on those.
If we were to have Pearl tax, would that help with, I mean, is there funds coming out of the general fund that could replace?
There are some.
Maybe there could be some type of supplanting go on there.
Our maximum Pearl intake is probably about $800,000. So if you think about that, if we were aggressive and we could do a 50% supplant, you'd get about maybe $400,000.
But the Pearl allows us to do some things that we're not able to do
Well,
right now.
right, but
So-
I know that, and I think it's a great idea for those reasons, but if it can help here.
Like the dropout prevention would be one area, I think that there could be possibly some crossover with Pearl, but I'm sure
Right now,
not
just
soak it all up.
Yeah, just as an example, dropout prevention is one of those areas where we significantly exceed the money that is allotted to us on categorical aid. So we are spending more on our dropout prevention programs than the state provides us in dropout prevention dollars. So that's
Part of that's to do with Liberty High School too, so when we had to staff Liberty according to our other models, trying to roll that out and scale back our services across so that we have the same level of programming at all the sites.
So we will bring, actually, Pearl's one of those things that we would like to talk to you about in more detail. We put it on the agenda for December 11th, so we do plan to share an update with you on that and what a timeline might look like for that.
I'll give you just a very general thought, and part of it we'll talk about here in a minute, but I understand we can't keep it all out of the classroom, right? I mean, I get that, and there's what I want to see or would like to see is that we're at least kind of spreading it out, right? And when you just kind of have the big chunk here on the early retirement being the biggest piece there, I mean, I assume that's spreading it out all over the place.
That will.
Hopefully it's not everybody in one school, but the parts that I'd be the most concerned with is losing money where we do already see the highest needs, right? So the RAM chunk, right? I mean, there's a reason we have it, and then some of that attendance support busing. I mean, those two pieces they're in place because we have concerns about those students having access to their education. So the places where it's a very targeted area that we're affecting are the ones that concern me the most. Being able to do it with, we worked on boundaries, does it lessen the amount of busing we need to do? That's great. Changing kind of the RAM model so we're not overstaffing at some of the schools, because I think we are in some cases. I looked at, I'm not going to go over all the RAM data, but there are places where I think if we had more striations, and maybe we'll see that here in a minute, that we might gain some stuff, but I'd be leery to just say, well, that's where we're taking the resource away, because, I mean, we made a concerted effort to put resources there for a reason, and those would be the areas that I'd be worried about. But as a whole, you know, it's not like, all right, we're cutting orchestra or anything like that, right? And that gets very specific and targeted, and none of us around this table would feel good about doing those kinds of things. So.
Return on investment on those is pretty low too.
So I don't see it built in here, but I'd be interested to know operational savings that we have that could be obtained through pairings.
And we see most of that through staffing?
But like as part of this model,
Mhm.
I'd be interested in seeing, you know, what are we spending per student right now in our buildings that are potential school pairings? What could we spend if we paired them? How would it be different?
So it'll help drive that conversation.
Yeah.
From the efficiencies.
And
The
we can
only thing
definitely,
is though, then you're cutting on forecast, right? I mean, because it's a projection at that point. I mean, I think when we had that pairing conversation with you, it was hard to put numbers to that because we don't really know. And I mean, I think Craig did a good job of showing how critical this situation is. And personally, I would be nervous on that just from the standpoint that we think this will be a savings, but we have to have a real savings, I think, in this scenario. That's the only thing I would just think about with that.
I was gonna say, we can bring that back to you, but I think that's a year 2 or beyond.
Yeah,
So-
that wouldn't address this for right now, but I would feel better with the RAM reduction doesn't feel good to me unless we have something else that we got in mind that we know we're gonna address some of those situations where we're not RAM staffing and it's costing an awful lot to
And
teach
maybe,
students.
if I can, that'd be a good segue to just show you where we're at right now, and then what you'll be able to see shortly. So one of the things that we did know, and I'm gonna shrink this down first so you can
And
just see.
Steve, can I just say a little
Yeah.
bit more on that? My concern is that I don't want the RAM schools, the high-staffed RAM schools to bear more than their share. I know there are some schools that are, I don't know, by your model, if it's high or low, but have high class sizes and low poverty, and then there's some schools that have low poverty and low class sizes. So I'd like to see them
Mhm.
share some of that savings,
Yep.
instead of it just be the high RAM, low class sizes.
And we actually talked about that with our elementary administrators today. So I'm showing you this conceptually now, so you're not focused on the details. So I did with our elementary principals too, because otherwise they want to be able to see the schools right away, which we can talk about in a moment. But so right now we have 3 RAM models. There are 3 RAM levels in there. And what we attempted to do through this process was continue to meet the needs of our apex schools, and yet still look for some efficiencies in there. The one thing you're going to see in here, which we are working on data for that, is these numbers are all in red. The reason they're all in red is if you blow it up and look at it, every grade level in every school says that there's only 1 student at each grade level. Obviously, that's not the case because we have more than 7 students in each building. But what we did was when we put the new attendance areas together, we know how many kids are in that school. What we weren't able to see until Adam builds a different level or different layer into Guide K-12 is we can't see where they're at by grade level cohort. So he's building that out for me right now, should have it by the end of the week. So one of the things that you will see when we populate that is instead of all these columns being red, you'll see some that are green and some that are red. Now, to Lori's point, if this worked out perfectly, it would work out like it does for our demographic statistics, which are red and yellow up here and green down here. So it would flip, and we would see all of these class sizes in green here, and they'd be red here. In other words, your highest class sizes would be down here, and your lowest class sizes would be up here. Because of operational inefficiency, we don't always see that. So we'll be able to drill into that as we go through this process and see where those inefficiencies lie. And that helps us from a surgical standpoint, making better decisions. All right? And so Amy and I have talked about that. We'll be able to see that when we get more data. That'll help influence our decision-making process. But by doing it this way, it also gives us that opportunity to continue to meet the needs of those apex schools. So if you want to think about current RAM and think about how does a 5-level versus a 3-level fit. Level 1 is still level 1. Same staffing level that we have right now. So our highest need schools still get the same staffing. There was a gap between 1 and 2, and so there's now an intermediate layer in there. So these 3 schools are now in this RAM 2, which under the old model you can think about it as a 1.5. These schools here that are listed in RAM 3, this is the old RAM 2 staffing level. So these schools are staffed where they were. We've moved this into an intermediate. What does this allow us to do? It gets a little more efficiency out of there. So we can squeeze a few staff people out of there, but still meet the needs of those students. The bulk of the students in our district have now moved into this RAM 3 level. And we now have a RAM 5 level, which is a new level that's staffed at a higher ratio than they were before. As you can see from the demographics in green, these are all of our schools that have been identified as having the lowest opportunity challenge. So we're going to staff those at a little bit higher level than we've staffed them in the past. Collectively, when we go through and do that, we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to see a reduction of 10 FTE within the RAM model for teachers and support staff.
What's that high level?
High level.
What's the highest class size?
Pull that up a little bit more. So down here, there we go.
It goes up to every.
So you're looking at, say, a Grant Elementary School, low socioeconomic status population 16%, ELL at 1.8, special ed at 5.3. Your kindergarten to second grade classes wouldn't exceed 28. Your third to sixth grade classes wouldn't exceed 32. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that we very rarely, and I don't know if I would go as far as to say any, but it's pretty close to any, staffed anyone at that cap level last year. So if we were trying to keep it at 30 or under, which is what you'd see if you moved up to the RAM 3, right? So you're looking at 30 or under for grades 3 to 6. Very, very few sections as you go across and look at these averages here. So you look at these schools, you got Weber, Morlaw, Lincoln, etc., and you look at the class sizes that are here. You go across over here, you're looking at the class sizes. These are all last year's class sizes, so that's on there, and you can look at that. 27, 24, 27. You find a 29.5 here, but clearly the lion's share of our classrooms are not at that 30 level. So by pushing it up to 30, it gives us a little bit of leeway. And will those class sizes creep up? Sure. Are you likely to see these instead of being 24, 25, might they be 26, 27? Absolutely. We'll know a little bit better once we have those enrollment numbers and we can actually fit them into cohorts and see how they staff out as those formulas run that through.
This necessitate any change in our board goals on numbers?
On our facility master plan?
Yeah. Well, no, on our yes, our
3J6?
I'm coming up with the wrong terminology, but
3J6?
yeah.
Yeah, we need to take a look at that again. So, again, I don't need you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on it now. I need you to think about it. We're going to be able to bring this back to you with actual numbers embedded in the system so you can see what it looks like in terms of its impact on class size on an average basis overall. And we'll be able to look at it in terms of our budget reduction process and see what it does in terms of creating that relief that we need in order to meet our budget mark.
One quick one, and you know, we are in the season of giving. With the foundation and with the technology in the classroom, we raised $2 million or something like that. Is there any, I'm looking at another funding stream. Is there anything that would prohibit foundation funding going into the general fund?
The foundation can make donations to specific programs. I'll tell you that one of the things that we are very, very leery of with the foundation is asking them to pay for something that's an ongoing commitment.
No, I understand, I just.
We actually require them, if they're gonna pay for something that's gonna happen over multiple years, before we put it into place, we actually ask them to have 2 to 3 years worth of funding for that in place before we actually commit to it, because we don't wanna make a commitment to it inside of our program and then have them come back in year 2 or 3 and say, oh, we can't raise the money for that. So we wanna make sure that they've got a commitment to the funding stream before we make a commitment to the program. But definitely, that's an opportunity to continue to have that dialogue with them about where they're spending their funds and where our opportunities are to direct those where they have the greatest impact in the classroom. Turn to the team real quick. You've been with me through the journey with our admin council and working on this. Chase, Amy, Matt, Craig, anything else that we need to share with the team here?
Finally have to experience what almost every other district in the state is experiencing. And it's a little rubber. And so I'm balancing this out with the SBRC coming in and just saying, foreign language is done, and you're not teaching it. You know, I mean, that I would imagine it would be more of a hatchet job than all of it. I doubt they're going to redesign a RAM model.
No, they'll come in and tell you got too many elementary teachers, go ahead and get rid of them.
Yeah.
And it's a blunt instrument. We're really trying to be very targeted in our work. You know, part of this, like I said, this staffing level is exactly the same next year as it is this year, because we recognize, to your point, Sean, that these are the classrooms that need it the most. That's a slight adjustment, but not a major adjustment from last year. Even for these classrooms down here, that's a slight adjustment from last year. It's not a catastrophic adjustment from last year. So, yes, you've got buildings that are moving down, if you will, but they're not going to see a wholesale change in the way that business is done in their buildings. So we're trying to keep that balance in there and really try to meet the needs of all of the kids, but keep in mind that there are differential needs that are out there.
Steve, just help me understand this. I think you explained it, but I'm not understanding why you've taken the classes down to just one section at all the buildings.
Oh, because I don't know where the kids are. So if you look at this,
So there's really not the savings.
Well, if you look at that, right now it shows that we saved 240 teachers. That's not accurate. If you look over here to the right,
We're going to have 121 kids in one class at Gardner.
this over here is the magic set of cells. So last year we had 7,746 kids. Right now it says we have 147 kids. That's because as you scroll down here, every single class section only has one student in it. That generates only one teacher. What Adam is doing right now is he's using our new live-in numbers to help me generate cohort numbers for this year. I'll then be able to age progress those to next year, and then I'll be able to do that to create some staffing projections for us. Then we'll know where the savings lie. And we should have that within a week or so.
Is that on our agenda?
Yeah, because if we could actually save 224 teachers, then our budget would be solved. And elementary staffing meetings would be a lot smaller when they rating.
They would be a lot, yeah.
Is that on our agenda again for us to review with the actual numbers?
We don't have it on the board agenda, but I think we need to have it on another work session agenda coming up. Actually, I think we're going to need to have this on our regular work session, post-board meeting agendas moving forward for the next couple of months as we close in on it, just to make sure that we're able to triangulate review and get your feedback as we go through it, so it's not episodic, but it actually becomes just part of the process.
I mean, I think we'll need some real numbers to see what the staffing impact is at those schools. I mean, there's the difference, you know, when you look at RAM 1 and RAM 2 as far as the demographics in there. I mean, it's a line you drew at, 70%, right? Which, what's 70.8 and then the next one's 69.8, right? Like, that's not a huge difference. When there's the difference between the new 4 and 5, there's a pretty good gap there, and it looks cleaner. I think you're right in that you might not see as big of a staff impact. I remember looking at some of the data, we were looking at current actual levels versus what it would look like if we didn't have RAM altogether. And I think it was Twain, there was like almost no difference at all just because of the numbers of kids that were in the various grade levels.
Right.
They didn't hit the tipping point or whatever.
Right.
So without having the actual numbers, how to know, it's hard to see what it really impacts. So I think that'll be important to see.
And I must have missed this one, Steve, but what are the cutoff levels at the each level of their?
They're, oh, sorry, I don't have it pulled up right now. They're in the upper right-hand corner if you look at
Okay.
that. So, pull this back up for you real quick. So if you look at, for instance, if we're looking at Hills there, we're trying to staff at no more than 20 in K2, no more than 24 in 3-6. So it's these numbers that are right up there.
Oh, okay.
Or do you mean the percentage FRL?
Oh, okay,
That's the numbers.
gotcha, okay. And is that somewhere?
No, that's just my notes from
Could-
today.
could
Yeah,
you-
can I run it for you?
Sure, that'd be awesome.
All right. Well, I know that was a lot of information. We recognize that this is really the first step in the dialogue. Appreciate your time and attention tonight. We'll be back with more information as we move further on in the process. Like I said, what we'd really like you to do is we'd like you to think deeply about this. And if there are things in here that really cause you concern, please let us know. The sooner the better. We'd hate to be looking at some area, like Sean said, if there's, you were talking about our discretionary busing or our high needs RAM schools. If there's some areas that you look at and you want to say to us that is off limits, we need to know that. If there's areas that we haven't explored that you want to say, hey, why not? We need to know that too, because we want to make sure that we bring you back accurate information. So if those things come up, please pick up the phone, give me a call, drop me an email, let me know. And then we can make sure to incorporate that in future discussion.
What I'd like to know is what the top 2 tiers feel about those class sizes. Do they feel they can be successful with those class sizes? I'd like to hear from those teachers some feedback.
Which, the high FRL schools are below?
Hills, Kirkwood, Wood,
Okay, but-
Alexander, Tween. I
And
don't
Hope
know if
Hills and
Wood is-
Kirkwood are, because it's exactly the same, so that won't change, theirs won't change.
It's exactly the same?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
didn't change them at all?
No.
Tier 1 is the same as
Tier 1's the same,
But
and
Tier
Tier
two-
3 is actually the old Tier 2. That's exactly the same. So you've got a couple of
Gotcha.
schools that are shifted into an area in between the old Tier 1 and Tier 2.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and that's why, like I said, one of the things that we really tried to do is those changes that those schools will experience are incremental. And depending on what the cohort size is, back to the idea that like Twain didn't experience anything at all when we took RAM away completely, it's because of their cohort size. We won't know that until we run that through here. So when you're able to look at that, remember you've got in green, you've got this year, you'll be able to see what's the change by grade level for each FTE assignment. We'll be able to see that after we get those numbers through there.
And we won't know this before we decide on anything like this, but I really am excited to see how the right sizing helps others.
Yeah.
Anyway, that they may feel less pressure, they've got overall in the school, 100 less kids.
You know, to Phil's comments earlier about return on investment, that right sizing of the building may have as great an impact on socio-emotional learning as reducing the class size does. Right? Because the friction that occurs in the cafeteria, out at the playground, in the library, et cetera, that's going to go down just with having fewer bodies.
74.
Still not even.
All right. Thank you.
And a motion to adjourn?
See.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourn.